Damon, it's always a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your memories and experiences of Silverstone, which is a place clearly very special to everybody. But tell us why it's so special to you.
It has to be connected to a long history of going to Silverstone as a child to see my dad, or be with my dad at least when he was working, and going there with my mum and our family. So from the early years, I mean, we're talking the 1960s now. I was experiencing Silverstone as a young child, wandering loosely around the paddock like some sort of urchin, interfering with things and collecting stickers. We did a lot of that when they were giving away stickers, but they were actually quite often they were adverts for cigarettes. So and they were given away by scantily clad women. So that's how long ago it was. It was back in the bad old days of cigarettes and things like that. So that's my early experience of Silverstone. But of course, winning the British Grand Prix, having the trophy presented to me by Princess Diana as well, was something that you never ever forget.
We will come back to that, I promise, because we can't do this podcast without talking about it. But I do want to go back to those early memories. Do you remember the first time that you were taken to Silverstone, and what was it like?
It grew into my consciousness. It probably started with something like cakes and tea and sandwiches, and then sort of expanded from that point outwards until I was actually aware there was a loud noise coming from somewhere, and that would be the cars. So, and then of course later on it was about the fans, the crazy, because in those days there was no barriers really. I mean, people could get in the center of the circuit, and my dad would be followed everywhere by a gaggle of fans wanting his autograph, and I was given his bag to carry sometimes while he fought his way through these enthusiastic fans. And we used to fly in his aeroplane, so landing at Silverstone was quite a spectacular thing. Coming in, flying in, seeing all the tents and the cars parked on a hot summer's day was something to remember. And that's when we used to have hot summer days anyway. But it wasn't always like that. Nearly always windy, Silverstone. But good for landing your aircraft. So we'd land and then, I'd hang around the garages. And then I do remember that when these characters turned up once, called the Hesketh team, I do remember thinking, wow, these people are a little bit outlandish, because they would have all sorts of parties going on and people following them, the very posh people following them.
Something certainly extraordinary about them. So you would have been, I think, 2 and 8 when your father won the championship. But I mean, do you remember when you were 8? I mean, you wouldn't remember being 2, but 8. I kind of feel like you and your sister, you might have remember that.
Vaguely. I mean, well, yeah. I mean, he used to win the championship like I did in faraway places like Mexico or South Africa. So it was usually Silverstone would have been during that period. So I wasn't. I actually only remember seeing him and being conscious of him winning, because he never won the British Grand Prix, of course. But he did win the Daily Express International F1 race, and I do remember that. And I think it was also at the same time that Arsenal were playing Liverpool in the FA Cup final, or might have been Leeds. Anyway, I was more interested in the football. That's a terrible indictment. But I do remember also the big crash with Jodie Scheckter, because I was standing on the wall next to my mum, who was timing, when it all kicked off. So that was 73, I think. Big shunt on the start and finish line, famous, massive multiple pile-up. So yeah, I remember lots of memories, and it was there that I first rode a motorbike. There was a couple of characters called the Shevlov brothers, Nick and Michael Shevlov, and they said they were playing on a motorbike, and they said, "Do you want to have a go?" So that's where my love of motorbikes started, at Silverstone.
It's certainly a real family affair for you, a family love affair with Silverstone. As you say, your mum, your dad, you and your sister would go there for a long weekend, and that was your life. You fell in love with bikes first. But at what point do you think you became aware of how important Silverstone was to fans, to the whole British sporting community?
I think probably not until I was a Formula One driver. I suppose, on the way up, you're aware. I mean, don't forget the Grand Prix was alternating at sometimes between Brands and Silverstone, but finally the sense prevailed because Brands was awfully difficult to get everyone in and out of. It was a great venue for. It had a great amphitheatre to it. Silverstone, being more spread out, has always maybe been more difficult to spectate the entire race from, but. The improvements that have been made now have increased the spectator experience, which is very important, obviously crucial. But I mean, I obviously became very aware when I was in F1 the impact, because you as a driver you just don't get the same attention as you do at a British Grand Prix weekend. So the interest is huge and the expectation is huge, but the reception is huge as well. So you do get lifted. I do believe Nigel was actually right. I mean, I think it's probably more like 2 seconds a lap. I could have done with 2 seconds a lap when I was in the Brabham, that's for sure.
That first outing at Silverstone in Formula One was challenging. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, well, I got in the race. I think that was the first challenge. But unfortunately, we qualified with a very uncompetitive car, which meant I was lapped, I think, 6 times by Nigel. So I was actually lapped by the car that I was working on with Williams. So it was a good measure of how important the car was.
How bizarre to have that experience. And that wasn't the most probably memorable weekend that you've ever had at Silverstone, but it did help to formulate, I suppose, your future and to hone you into the person you are today.
It does, yeah. I think tough experiences do prepare you for what's coming, because it doesn't get easier when you get closer to the front. Even though you might have a better car, it just gets more intense and more in the spotlight as well. So you're scrutinized to a much greater degree. So yeah, I think sometimes the hard way up is probably a better preparation than the easy one.
Take us back to 1994 then. It was Michael Schumacher had a great start to that season, but things were different at Silverstone. Did you feel that there was a change in the air?
Yes, because I mean, don't forget we'd lost Ayrton by that point as well. So there had been such a huge shift around in all kinds of areas of the sport. The name of Ayrton was no longer there, and we expected Ayrton to be really leading the charge and the championship by that point. But it was left to me to do what I could with Williams against Michael Schumacher, who was on the up, never won a championship before. We knew he was good, but we didn't realize he would go on to become now the second best racing driver of all time. But at that time, he hadn't won a championship. So, and there was all sorts of mutterings about the legality of the car and some of his tactics. So it's not news to say that Michael was very uncompromising competitor, as were the Benetton team. So they were up against it. Williams were up against it. So, but the championship was becoming about me and Michael and Williams and Benetton. So it was a very intense British Grand Prix when we arrived, and there was a lot of. I think I said something stupid and about Michael, and it went viral. Sort of in those days, we didn't have the internet, but it sort of went news viral, and there was all kinds of back page stories with. I remember one headline was I think I tore a strip off a journalist from the Mirror, and the back page was "He's gone nuts" or something like that. So. A lot of pressure.
Do you ever play the media in that point? Did you use the media and the British press and their sort of avid enthusiasm?
I think you can't help but be conscious of it, and I think the mistake I made was that excuse me, I moved the camera. The mistake I made was that I thought that they were on my side. And they're not. They are there to report stories, and whatever story is a story is a story. So, if there was a fallout between Michael, or Michael said something cheeky about me, then that was as good a story as me saying cheeky things about him. And I think I didn't quite understand the volatility of the media back then, and it was something to learn, because I'd never been in the front line before myself. I'd seen people being in the front line, but not been there myself.
Can you take me back to the morning of that race? Because obviously we'd had qualifying already, that had set you up, but you know that the job has to be done on race day. So what was your routine when it came to a race, and was that a standard race routine for you at the British Grand Prix?
Well, I think a lot of it is strategizing, getting into the circuit at first, and making sure you're able to get in. Back in those days, so early uprising and get and have your breakfast in you, and all those little routine things. So that you've ticked all the boxes. Usually, I was on a carbo diet in those days, so I'd carbo load before a Grand Prix. So I'd have porridge and bananas, which I actually really liked, and it sort of get your carbo loads up ready for the race. Quite physical, those cars in those days, although they weren't pulling as many G's. The steering was quite heavy, and anyway, I sound like I'm moaning, but they Silverstone's quite a tough track.
Yeah, it certainly is. So, are you an early riser? Did you like getting up in the morning? Because I know some racing drivers battle it.
I like to get up and go. I do burn out quite early, so I have to learn to use my energy wisely. But so yeah, Silverstone is a routine. You get in there, you have press things you have to do. You have to um, focus as well, and you have to give yourself space. There's all, it's not as bad as it is now. I mean, there's so many routines they have to go through. It was probably a little bit more relaxed back in those days by today's comparisons with regard to sponsorship commitments and stuff. So yeah, not as structured then as it is now.
There was still a fair amount of media. Was it part of the grid walk by then? I'm sure there were grid walks, and you probably had to speak to people on the grid.
Yeah, I think we had Martin Brundle on the grid. Maybe not 94. Maybe not yet. No, I think he was still racing, wasn't he? So yeah, yeah, yeah. So but yeah, I think there was cameras, but it was seen as an intrusion really, and you didn't have to do it, and there was no. I don't think there was a kind of ambition to talk to people on the grid. But I did have pole position, so I was able to kind of decline interviews probably. I don't remember too much about whether I did interview. I mean, the usual dignitaries are on the grid, um, and usually politicians who you never see any other time, but they like to go to the British Grand Prix. Now they're not allowed to, I think, because it's seen as a kind of freebie, kind of inducement of some sort. So, but yeah, celebrities, not as many perhaps as they have today. But Princess Diana did come with the children to say hello, and that was before the race. So we got a royal visit, and I saw her later
Amazing, yeah, which was a good thing.
on the podium. I'd like to say, yeah.
The battle between you and Michael can't be underplayed, as you say. It was pretty fierce, and that was a really complicated race. I think it's fair to say. It wasn't smooth running, but you did come away with a win. Do you remember being in the car thinking, "This is bizarre," or are you just so focused on your race you weren't aware so much?
Well, it was very odd because we went off on the parade lap, the first one, and Michael sped off into the lead, and you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to not pass the guy on pole position, but he went off a bit of a lick, and then I thought that's a bit odd. So I ignored it, and we lined up on the grid, and then I think it was Martin Brundle's engine blew up. Actually, I think that's the on the grid, so they had to do another parade lap. And so they abandoned that start. We did another one, and he did the same thing. So I got on the radio and said, just to let the team know, there's something a bit funny about that. He's not supposed to do that. So we ignored that again. And I guess the stewards took another view to it as well. So I think at some point he got a penalty for doing something. Might have been that actually. But then he ignored the black flag in the race. And went on to the end and just completely ignored it. So then he got himself into more trouble. And I think he finished the race in the pit lane, taking his penalty in the pit lane, I believe, which is one of Ross Brawn's clever little ploys to reduce the penalty. Very clever man, Ross Brawn. But anyway, we got the race win. I think that's right. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and that must have been an incredible moment for you to be in the car coming around. I mean, it was a bit of a mess to know what the final lap was, obviously, because you'd done an extra formation lap, but you got it.
Well, I'd seen how Nigel had done it and how the track was invaded by fans. They didn't quite invade on my. I think they got banned from invading by then. But Marshall came out with a huge flag, that British, Union Jack flag on a length of 12-foot pole of 2x4 or something, and plopped it in my car. And when I got back, I obviously had to get rid of it. But the FIA later tried to penalise us for picking up weight on the way to the on the way to the scrutineering bay, because you're not supposed to pick up weight. So they counted the flag as weight, but of course it was hardly a kind of secreted away within the car. Everyone could see what it was. So it was a bit of a stupid kind of penalty, really. But they didn't get. We got away with that for picking up weight. But years later, I was driving through London, and a guy pulled up alongside me in a white van and wound down the window, and I thought I'd done something wrong to upset him, and he was yelling at me saying, "Hey, hey!" And I thought, "Oh no, what's this?" And it turned out he said, "Hey, you remember you picked up that flag at Silverstone? That was my bit of wood." So that's nice, isn't it?
It's a small world. He almost cost you the win.
I said, "You don't want it back, do you?"
I have to try and find it from somewhere.
I haven't got it anymore.
We all know the fans at Silverstone and at any British Grand Prix are tremendous, but they must have just been incredible that day.
Yes, every time, it's if you're a British driver at the British Grand Prix, you're treated as an absolute hero, and it's great when you turn up along the Dadford Road and you've got, you can look across the fields and there's flags with your name on and stuff waving, and it's a really good positive vibe at that race, and it, when you are circulating and you're leading a race, you literally can see this Mexican wave that's going 150 miles an hour around the circuit. It's a tremendous feeling.
And standing on the podium is always special, but doing it at your home race and then having, of all people, Princess Diana awarding you the trophy. Just talk me through your memories of that, because it must be incredible.
Yeah, I think you're elated because you've won a race, and also, so the reception is fantastic, and it's a real honor when you have someone, because the royals have not typically been to the British Grand Prix. The Queen and the Queen Mum, I think, came to the first one, and then we have had the Duke of Kent and Prince Michael of Kent quite often have come, but we've not had on the podium, I don't think, a member of the royal family presenting a trophy. So I think that may have been one of the very rare times. So I was honoured to get that.
Very special times. And of course, in our minds, it's kind of cemented by your great friendship with Murray Walker, because they go hand in hand for people that were at home and watching it, I presume.
Well, of course, he's the backdrop, isn't he? When you're racing, you can't hear his commentary, but you do get it later on when you go home and watch the race. But it's important. It's really important to have someone like Murray. There's no one like Murray, obviously, but it's important to have Murray Walker commentating on your sporting achievements, because he added so much to people's memories and people's experience of what you're doing. You can watch cars going round and round and it doesn't mean much, but when you have Murray commentating, people understand the emotions, they understand the achievement as well. So I'm blessed to have had to race at a time when I had Murray commentating on my races. Not that there's anything wrong with Martin Brundle and David Croft at all, in fact, but we have to move on.
We certainly do. And I just because we are going to be going back to Silverstone, and Murray had such a great love for the track and such a great knowledge of everything to do with the British Grand Prix, it's going to be strange to go there knowing that he's not around to watch it. He's not around to be part of the festivities, I suppose.
Yeah, yes, it's very sad, isn't it? And but he's in our minds, and I think that Silverstone will always echo to the sounds of Murray Walker and all the incredible moments that he commentated on. When I said I couldn't hear him in my car, I actually told a little untruth there, because there was one time, in fact, in '93, when he was broadcast into my crash helmet via some telly loop or whatever, to tell me that I was on pole position. So I was going around on my slowdown lap, and Murray comes on and says, "And Damon, you are on pole position for the British Grand Prix." Well, I was obviously elated. And then he came back about 20 seconds later to say, "Oh, Damon, I'm terribly sorry to tell you, you're not on pole position because Alan Prost has just beaten your time." So I could hear his commentary actually on one occasion. It wasn't good news.
Now you're kind of looking at the sport in a different way, part of the Sky team, as you say, and you'll be involved with the British Grand Prix, I'm assuming. How excited are you for this season's race to be at Silverstone with a whole contingent of fans back?
I think the wonderful thing about Silverstone is that the fans are so knowledgeable about the sport. I mean, they obviously want a British winner, and we've had quite a few of those, so that's good. But whoever wins will get a fantastic reception. And I think that when Arriva Bene commented on this when Ferrari won a few years back, and he just said he was really touched by the fans that they supported Ferrari when Ferrari won the British Grand Prix. So, I think that's a tremendous feather in our cap. We should be proud of that.
And I tell you what, we're having a terrific season so far. Max Verstappen bringing the challenge to Lewis Hamilton, and Max is, on a Red Bull, in fact, are on a very good run at the moment. I think it's the perfect time to have the British Grand Prix in the championship.
No, it really is. I think we've always been the success of the race depends on the success of Formula One. They're very intrinsically linked together. People will turn up to watch a Grand Prix, a fantastic Grand Prix. And when you've got a title fight going on between two teams, it just adds so much spice. We've got so many teams near Silverstone, of course, and we've got the new Aston Martin team still there. That's the Silverstone-based team. And so much of it is just so local that it's always going to get good support, and it's very important. So the facilities keep on improving, and I think the whole experience. They got the museum there as well now, the Silverstone Experience Museum. So there's so much more to do as well, and let's hope we can get back to people camping and putting on the show, the evening entertainment as well. And it's a whole massive weekend for motorsport.
I think everybody's still very keen to get the F1 band back up and running when it comes to the end of a race weekend. Is there any chance that you can have a word with the musicians of the grid? We know Lewis Hamilton loves a bit of music. You could get the band back together, Damon.
I'm not sure they want me in the band, but I think Lewis will be able to put together some fairly serious musicians probably for his band if he ever did anything like that. But maybe it's a distraction on the race weekend. The one we used to do was very impromptu. I mean, it really was a bunch of mates of Eddie Jordan's on the back of a truck, and no one was watching, and it was just a bit of fun. And that gets, like all these things, they get out of hand.
You're a fantastic musician. Don't downplay that side of yourself either.
Thank you. Right. Well, I'll do one of my half-hour guitar solos for you.
I mean, what can I say? Beautiful. Let's schedule a time for it.
I want all the amplification you can get.
Oh, Damon, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I hope you have a very good British Grand Prix this year. And here's hoping that the championship lives up to all our expectations this year.
It will, Jenny, and great. And thanks for having me on your podcast. And good luck to Silverstone. It's been great. It's been a great experience, and it's going to get better.